What happens when a nation's military, armed with machine guns and the full authority of the state, declares war on a flock of birds? And the birds win? This isn't a hypothetical, this happened right here. And tonight, we're opening the case file. G'day, and welcome back to Aussie Oddities. I'm Bruce.
And I'm Damer.
The year is 1932. The world is in the grip of the Great Depression. In the desolate and isolated wheat belt of Western Australia, thousands of returned soldiers, men who survived the horrors of the First World War, were promised a new life, a piece of land to call their own. But that promise was turned into dust. This isn't a story about simple pest control. It's a documented military operation, shrouded in failure and hidden motives. And we are about to unpack the official record. To understand the war, you first have to understand the battlefield. After World War I, the Australian government enacted the Soldiers' Settlement Scheme. The idea was noble: reward our returning heroes with tracts of marginal land and encourage them to become pioneers. But the promise came with a catch. The government guaranteed subsidies for their wheat, a promise that became their entire lifeline. So hold on, these blokes survived the absolute hell of World War I, come home to a promise from the government, and then get hit with this. You can almost feel the frustration building. But the deal soured. The Great Depression hit the global economy like a sledgehammer. The price of wheat plummeted, and the promised subsidies from the government, they never materialized. The men were trapped. They were heavily in debt for their equipment, their land was ravaged by drought, and now their crops were effectively worthless. They were facing total financial ruin. Letters were sent to Perth, petitions were signed. They weren't asking for a handout, they were asking for what they were owed. The response was silence. The tinder box was set, all it needed was a spark. That spark arrived on the march, on two legs, and in biblical numbers. Every year after their breeding season, the emus migrate towards the coast, an ancient cycle. But in 1932, that cycle led an estimated 20,000 emus directly to the new farmlands. For the emus, it was a paradise. For the farmers, it was the final plague. They didn't just eat the wheat, they trampled it, tearing down fences and letting other pests flood in. At their breaking point, a deputation of these ex-soldiers went to see the Minister for Defence, Sir George Pearce. They were soldiers, so they thought like soldiers. They asked for military-grade machine guns. Any reasonable government would have explored other options, but Sir George Pearce saw a political opportunity. He didn't just agree to loan out the guns, he authorised a full-scale military operation. He wasn't sending a pest controller, he was sending the army. Their mission, under the command of Major G.P.W. Meredith of the Royal Australian Artillery, was to travel to the Campion district armed with 2 Lewis guns and 10,000 rounds of ammunition and wage war on the emu population. The Great Emu War had officially begun. The first engagement took place on November 2nd. The military's intelligence suggested a flock of about 50 emus was nearby. The plan was simple: lie in wait, let the birds get into range, and open fire. And here, the Australian military received its first tactical lesson from an avian adversary. The flock didn't panic predictably. The moment the first shot was fired, the entire flock instantly split into dozens of tiny, fast-moving groups, sprinting erratically in all directions. It was impossible to draw a bead on any of them. The soldiers had machine guns, but the emus had mastered guerrilla warfare. The first attempt was a complete failure. The second attempt a few days later was even more farcical. The artillerymen mounted a Lewis gun to the back of a truck, thinking they could outmaneuver the birds. The result was a shamble. The emus were faster and more agile. The truck bounced so violently on the rough terrain that the gunner couldn't land a single shot. At one point, an emu became entangled in the truck's steering gear, causing it to crash through a farmer's fence. The bird escaped. The truck did not. This was a tactical disaster. A trained military force was being comprehensively defeated by the superior tactics of the wildlife.
Alright, the legends have to have some stories about this. Has anyone ever seen an animal do something so clever it just completely stumped a human? A magpie, a roo, anything? Chuck it in the comments. I'm keen to read these yarns.
Major Meredith's official reports reflect a growing frustration. He noted, "If we had a military division with the bullet-carrying capacity of these birds, it would face any army in the world. They can face machine guns with the invulnerability of tanks." After a week and nearly 2,500 rounds fired, the army had killed fewer than 50 emus. It was a statistical irrelevance. But this is where the story turns from a simple military failure into something more sinister. Because a Fox Movie Tone News cameraman was present for the entire debacle. Sir George Pierce hadn't just sent soldiers. His plan was to capture heroic footage for a triumphant newsreel. What he got was a documentary of his own failure. The mission wasn't just about pest control. It was, at its heart, a desperate PR stunt to make it look like he was helping the farmers he had previously ignored. This is the point in the file where the story turns. It's not just about a strange battle. It's about politics and perception. To ensure you don't miss where these case files lead, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We have a lot more to uncover. They were facing total financial ruin. It's crucial to understand the mindset of these men. These were not just farmers. They were veterans of the Great War, men who had been promised a land fit for heroes by the very government that now ignored their pleas. They had survived the trenches of the Somme and the beaches of Gallipoli. They had seen order and chaos, and they believed in a system of command and reward. The psychological blow of being abandoned by their own government, after all they had sacrificed, was as devastating as the financial one. They were watching their new lives, their reward for service, wither and die in the dust. The truck did not. The ornithological commentary from the time, particularly from Dr. Dominic Serventi, reads less like a scientific paper and more like a war correspondent's dispatch from the front lines. He noted the emu's uncanny command structure. It wasn't random chaos. He described how each small mob had a leader, a large black-plumed bird that would act as a sentry. While the others fed, the leader would remain on high alert, and at the first sign of danger, it would give a call that sent the entire mob scattering in a pre-planned, unpredictable pattern. The soldiers were not just fighting a flock, they were fighting a coordinated, decentralized insurgency. Their military doctrine, designed for a centralized enemy, was useless, a desperate PR stunt to make it look like he was helping the farmers he had previously ignored. The plan backfired spectacularly. The international press seized on the story with glee. A conservationist in Britain famously quipped that the emus should be awarded military honors for their tactics. In the Australian Parliament, the opposition ridiculed Pierce relentlessly, asking if a medal would be struck for the Emu War, and suggesting the emus had invented a new form of guerrilla warfare. Pierce, who had hoped to be seen as a decisive leader, was now a global laughingstock. The pressure was immense, forcing a humiliating withdrawal of Major Meredith's forces, became a permanent scar on the government's reputation. And this is its ripple effect. The Great Emu War became a historical case study in government folly. For decades, it has been invoked as a cautionary tale against using simple, brute force solutions for complex ecological problems. It cemented a core part of the Australian identity, a deep-seated skepticism of government competence and a love for any story where the little guy, or in this case the big bird, wins against the odds. It's a reminder that on this continent, the land and its creatures often have the final say. But the story doesn't end with the military's withdrawal. The farmers' problems remained. Eventually, a more sensible solution was found: a bounty system. This proved far more effective and cost-efficient, with over 57,000 bounties claimed in just 6 months in 1934. It was a quiet, practical solution, but it was an admission that the grand military campaign had been a costly and embarrassing failure. The operation was officially called off, leading to widespread public ridicule in the press, as we've seen. The Great Emu War became the textbook example of misguided government intervention and a permanent scar on the government's reputation. The file is closed, but the key questions from the skeleton remain. What was the true long-term impact on the land? Why did the government fail to provide the promised subsidies in the first place? The official story of a pest control operation falls apart under scrutiny. The biggest question remains unanswered. If the military campaign was a cover for a PR stunt, what other deeper failures was that PR stunt meant to be covering up? The historical context is key. 1932 was a time of intense social unrest in Australia due to the Depression. Some historians theorize that any show of military force, even a farcical one, was a message for a restless public.
So the war on emus might have actually been a piece of theater for a different audience altogether. Look, we've got the army and we're not afraid to use it, even on the birds. That adds a whole new, much darker layer to this, doesn't it? It stops being funny and starts being a bit more sinister.
A show of force disguised as pest control.
The emus were just the unlucky extras in a much larger political drama, and luckily for them, they won this round. But the Emu War raises a frightening question. What happens when the government declares war on an animal and actually succeeds?
If the Emu War shows the absurdity of targeting native wildlife, our case file on the thylacine, the Tasmanian tiger, shows the tragedy. It's the story of a systematic eradication campaign that worked all too well. Click here to explore Australia's most haunting extinction. Thanks for joining us.